What if the most central figure in Christianity wasn't a man, but a woman? Today, we're diving into a really fascinating and, pretty controversial theory that suggests the true founder of the faith might have actually been Mary Magdalene, and that her real story was intentionally buried for almost 2,000 years. Let's get into it.
All right, so first things first, just take a look at this image. This is an iron cross, and it's in a churchyard in a place called Rennes-le-Château in France. Now, if you look closely, really lean in, you'll notice something pretty startling. That figure at the center, that's not Jesus. It's a woman, and she's identified as Mary Magdalene. So right away, this throws up a massive question. Why on earth is Mary Magdalene on a cross? Now, according to the theory we're looking at today, this isn't just some weird piece of local art, it's the tip of a huge iceberg, a clue pointing to a version of history that is radically different from the one we know. So to really unpack this whole mystery, we're going to follow the trail of clues laid out in the source material. We'll start with the cross itself, then look at the confusion around all the Marys in the Bible, follow a trail of hidden evidence, explore a supposed religious rebranding, figure out the motive behind it all, and finally, ask what this all means for history as we know it. Okay, Section 1, a cross of a different kind. So let's start our investigation with this central anomaly, the cross. The theory we're exploring argues that this isn't some isolated, one-off thing. Nope. It's part of a much bigger pattern of clues that suggest a history has been deliberately kept from us. And this really gets to the heart of it. The core claim here is absolutely explosive, that Mary Magdalene was the true founder of Christianity, but that her role was systematically erased during this massive religious rebranding about 1,600 years ago. And the theory suggests that clues to this hidden story were intentionally left behind for people like us to find. So, Section 2, the case of many Marys. If you're going to make a claim that big, where do you even start looking for evidence? Well, this theory begins by pointing to some serious confusion right inside the New Testament itself, specifically the case of the many Marys. Think about it. In the New Testament, you find at least 4 really prominent women named Mary. You've got the Virgin Mary, of course, Mary Magdalene, and then, get this, even 2 of Jesus' aunts were named Mary, Mary Jacobi and Mary Salome. The proposal we're looking at says this isn't a coincidence. It was a deliberate carving up of one incredibly powerful historical figure into several smaller, less significant characters to hide her true importance. And that leads to a pretty critical question. Was one powerful, worshipped female figure intentionally split apart? The theory suggests this was a strategic move, a way to manage the widespread devotion to Mary Magdalene by redirecting it toward the newly elevated Virgin Mary, which helps cement the control of a brand new religious power structure. All right, Section 3, a trail of hidden clues. So beyond just analyzing the text, the proposal then moves into its next phase, which is following a trail of physical and textual clues that proponents say have been scattered across Europe for centuries. The theory starts to pull together all these different threads. It points to these long-standing legends of Mary arriving in France after the crucifixion, the Gnostic Gospels that were discovered in the 20th century, art with hidden codes from secret societies, and, of course, those mysterious crosses we started with. The whole argument is that these aren't just isolated oddities, they're all pieces of a much, much bigger puzzle. And this idea of her being super important isn't just modern speculation. The theory points to these ancient texts, like the Gnostic Gospels that were found in the 20th century. Now, these were texts that were deliberately excluded from the official Bible. And in the Gospel of Mary, she isn't just portrayed as some follower. She's called the top disciple, a leader in her own right. Section 4, the great religious rebranding. Okay, so if Mary was this central figure, this leader, then what happened? Why isn't this the story we all know? This brings us to the most controversial part of the theory, the idea of a massive cover-up, a great religious rebranding launched by the early church. The argument presented here is that the early church, in trying to get more followers, did something really clever. Instead of banning popular pagan traditions, they just absorbed and rebranded them. So, for example, that midwinter festival celebrating the return of the sun becomes Christmas, celebrating the birth of the sun. See what they did there? And the widespread worship of goddesses and the sacred feminine gets funneled into devotion for the Virgin Mary. But according to the theory we're exploring, this rebranding wasn't just about absorbing a few holidays and symbols. It asks a much more radical question, suggesting the changes went way, way deeper.
And here it is, the theory's most dramatic, most mind-blowing claim, that the sex of the Messiah was actually changed from female to male. The idea is that when the Roman Emperor Constantine wanted to unify his empire, he took this emerging faith that was based on a female prophet, Mary, and for his own political reasons, he rebranded it into a male-led religion.
Section 5. Suppressing the sacred feminine. But why? I mean, what would be the motive for such a massive, monumental change? Well, the proposal points to a very clear political and social goal: the deliberate suppression of the sacred feminine.
The logic they present for this shift basically has 3 steps. First, worship of female deities and prophets was really common in religions before Christianity. Second, Emperor Constantine needed a male-dominated faith to reinforce the patriarchal power structures of his Roman Empire. And third, to pull that off, the new church had to systematically suppress the power of women, which was a complete reversal of what often came before. So, our final section, the truth is up for grabs. After looking at the weird cross, the clues, and this proposed cover-up, where does all this leave us? We've arrived at the final and maybe the most important part of this whole thing, the idea that the truth of what really happened is still very much up for grabs. The source material really frames this as a choice between 2 competing stories. On one side, you have the official story from the Bible, which is based on scripture and faith. On the other side, you have this alternative theory, built from interpreting historical artifacts, legends, and these other non-official texts. Both of them are asking us to believe in a very different version of history. And this is really the provocative thought this whole proposal leaves us with. It challenges our basic assumptions about the history we've been taught, and asks us to think about how much of it might just be the edited, curated version of events. It's a powerful reminder that history can be a detective story, and in the end, it's up to each of us to weigh the evidence. So, what do you think? Is the truth of our past still entirely up for grabs?